Hi, Jane here. Thanks for joining me again this week. This week I want to talk to you about your rough draft. Now, this should be every writer's essential goal, and I think sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle. I was sitting here the other day, I think it was Tuesday, it's been a crazy week, but I was just looking back at the posts that I've put out on my blog and was just looking at topics and trying to decide what I wanted to write about this week. And it was like the elephant in the living room to me, and I realized we need to talk about the rough draft. Now, whether you're writing a book or a blog or whatever, I'm kind of gearing this toward the book writer, but the same truths apply to someone who's trying to put out a blog as well. So with that in mind, think about if you're wanting to write a book, you have a project in mind, and yet you don't have a rough draft and you're not even sure how far away from it you are. We need to talk today. So I want to talk about the rough draft as truly being a beginning in your project. It's not the very beginning. It's not the very first thing that you do, but it when you get to that place and you have that computer file, you can print it out on paper, you can hold it in your hand, you can begin to edit, you can show it to somebody. You've accomplished something at that level. And it takes you up to a new level. And if you're a new writer and you've never experienced what that feels like to complete a rough draft, it's quite the experience all its own. And I don't think most authors ever forget how they felt the first time they completed one. And then it repeats itself every time you do one, because it signifies that you've done your work, that you've stayed with it, and you have something to show for it. And that's vital to your concept becoming a book. So it truly is a beginning. And I think we need to talk about, why is the rough draft so difficult? I've worked with authors and writers in various levels for the better part of 15 years, really. And I see some common threads that have run through all of that work. And so many struggle to produce that first rough draft. What is that about? Why is it so hard? Well, I think I knock it down into 5 basic categories. That's not to say that covers everything that could possibly be the reason, but most of it, I have found in my experience anyway, falls in one or a combination of these 5 categories. And very simply, they are commitment, discipline, focus, fear, and self-criticizing. Now let's take those apart ever so briefly. This is not an encyclopedic concept of what we're talking about here, but commitment is a word that people get kind of weirded out with. It's like, oh. And I think part of that is because commitment requires something of you. It requires, you're making a promise. And when you're writing a book, who are you making that promise to? Well, for everyone who writes a book, there's always your reason why you're going to write it and what you expect from it and what you want it to do and all of that. But quite ultimately, from a writing perspective, the commitment you're making is to yourself, to honor that concept that you have, that idea that you have for writing your book in the first place. And it takes time and effort. Now, yes, there are those examples that, where someone writes a book in a week, or somebody writes it on a napkin while they're riding on the train from here to there. And, it would be great if every book came together like Harry Potter, but that happened once. but it's not the norm. And so I think at some level, there's a little bit, for some, there's a little bit of a false expectation that, well, I ought to just be able to sit down and boom, this will be easy. And yeah, that can happen, but I think it's very unrealistic for you to expect that to happen. If it happens, take it. But uh, writing a book takes a lot more than that. So you need to get realistic about your commitment to this. And that can stop you from going to a rough draft because you just never show up to do the work. And writing a book is work. It's fun work at times. It's grueling at other times. It is work, but it's very rewarding because in the end, you're going to be a published author. That's awesome. The next thing that I mentioned was discipline. And, it's like, oh, Lord, we've talked about commitment. Now she's talking about discipline. Go away. I understand that. I truly do. But discipline doesn't have to be a bad word. It's just being mature and being very structured in how you're going to do this. Writing a book is some doing, and to write it effectively and have the best end product overall is to write consistently. And now in discipline, there are three basic, I don't know, call them rules, guidelines, whatever, that I personally keep in place for myself because I'm no different than anyone else. I can run rampant off, I can go down any rabbit trail that pops up, But if I'm going to produce what I'm wanting to produce, whether it's for myself or for a client, I have to stay on track. So my three little guidelines are, number one, set realistic writing goals and schedules. It's just that simple. You have to be realistic with it. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. The second one is to consistently write according to those goals and schedule that you created. Follow them, let them guide you. And the third thing, don't laugh, and it may be hard. It may be the hardest one of these three items. Never reread what you've written. There'll be a time for that, but your first goal needs to be create that rough draft. You've got to get it that far before it can ever be turned into a book. So in order to get to that rough draft, don't go back and reread what you've written. You get in trouble when you do. We'll talk about that. Realistic writing goals. Only you know how much research your project takes, what is there to do? Is there travel involved? I mean, some topics require a great deal of travel. And I'm speaking with someone right now who's facing that, and it's an issue. And so, you kind of have to build around that and ease yourself into it so that, it's difficult for most people to just drop right now and jump a plane and go travel. So you have to begin to schedule that and, be realistic in that. It's okay. There's research to be done. There's outlining, develop, what you want to write, why you want to write it. Take notes. There's a lot of prep work to writing a book. It's not all about just sitting down and boom, here comes the book. There's nothing magical about writing a book. It's just plain old hard work, and it's discipline. But start out with realistic writing goals. Realistic always means that you've applied it to time. When you're talking about goals, a realistic goal is just a dream until you've committed it to a calendar, until you've applied time to it. So take the time to work that out. This section I want to have, this part I want to have done by this time, this part by that time, and give yourself time and then consistently work to that as you go along. And that's the next thing. Consistently write. Now, if you're still in development stage, consistently work on developing your topic. But once you get to the writing stage, consistently write. If at all possible, it is so beneficial if you can write some every day. It doesn't have to be 8-12 hours a day. Most people can't do that anyway, but you do have a life, but at the same time, you can you can step out of that for a little bit and spend a little bit of time each day writing on topic, writing on your goals, writing the way you've set it up so that when you reach that target date, you've got that part done. And when you sit down and write a book, it's rare, in my experience, it's rare for someone to sit down and write a book and they just start with the intro and then chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and then they end up with the epilogue and everything is cool. Most material doesn't come quite like that. Sometimes you write the ending first because you know it, and then you back into it to see where you start from. Whatever the plan is, whatever the flow is for your project, follow it diligently, but be consistent in what you're doing with it. Consistency rules the day. It truly does. And then we go in, of course, to what I said, never reread what you've written. That can just get you into so much trouble. Your inner critic will look at it and give you every reason under the sun why you're the worst writer in the world and why are you even trying. And if you've written much at all, you know what I'm talking about. And it is real. And if you listen to that, you're done. You're toast. I mean, you'll just quit because it will be so convincing that you won't be able to, you won't have what it takes to fight it. So don't reread your stuff. That's just the easy way. But how can you do that? You just do it, because trust me, I've worked in this for a long time. There is a time for rereading, for revising, for editing, but it is not in the creative process. This is true in any kind of creative effort that you're doing. When you're creating and brainstorming and just creating, making it, pulling it together, that is not the time. Somebody can walk into the room in a board meeting. They can come into a creative planning meeting, and if they're a refiner and not a creative person, they will come in and criticize it and bring in all the reasons why. No, you can't do that. No, that won't work. Well, why are you doing it? And the whole thing stops. I've experienced that in the business world also. And it's self-defeating. There is a time in writing for editing, for revising, for rewriting even, but it's not in the creative process. Your goal when you start to write is to get that project to the level of a first draft. Your rough draft is just gold for you. And you need to get real with that and come on and see that the way it is. It's a little hard to not reread your material, so you'll have to practice with it a little bit, but you can do it. Now let's talk about the rough draft and your focus. Focus seems like this little nebulous thing, and it's so easy for us to lose. I just said, if I'm not watching myself, I can run down as many rabbit tracks as the next person. Facebook, it will prove that on me time after time after time. I go on there to post something, and then I see something that interests me, and the next thing you know, I've spent a half hour or an hour sitting there wasting time on Facebook when I should be doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So I control that by just limiting my FaceTime access when I have stuff to write. When I'm in writing mode, when I'm in project mode, I stay with what I'm supposed to be doing. Focus is just, that's why if you follow me at all, you know I talk about shutting down distractions, creating a nice place, a quiet place for you to write and to work, someplace that's away from family and friends and family pets. You know, nobody's going to hate you. Nobody in the family is going to disown you. Nobody on Facebook is going to unfriend you if you shut down access to yourself for a couple hours every day. Trust me, life will go on and you'll be fine. It will happen. But focus, you just have to focus when you're writing, when you're working on your project. If you don't, you'll write, it affects your writing. Let's just put it that way for sake of time right now. Focused writing is much better quality writing, and there'll be less editing and rewriting and revising when you get into that phase. and you won't break up the flow of it. You keep your focus on what you're writing, and it just works out so much better. Let's talk about rough draft and fear. Now, fear wears so many different masks, faces, and hats. Sometimes it's difficult to even recognize, oh, that was fear. I thought it was some real thing. Fear is always lies. It's never the truth, but it can be so convincing. And so you have to just I think you fall into one of two categories when you're dealing with fear as a writer. I'll just put it like this. We could say a lot more about it, but either one, you're going to recognize the fear, what you're fearing, whether you're afraid of failure, afraid of success, afraid of whatever. Either you're going to be able to recognize that fear and just deal with it however you deal with things and get it out to the side, and it's gone. And then you go on and you do your project, you do your writing, you do your work in freedom. And that's awesome. And the end result of that will be a rough draft. Or fear comes to you in some way, and you just, no matter what you do, it just kind of stays there. I call those little haunting things, that not spooky haunting, but they just don't leave you alone. And so in that case, you just got to go do it afraid. You get it as far from you as you can, and then you just move on. And you just do it whether your knees are knocking or not. You just go on and do it. Write your rough draft. You will be so glad that you do. And the next thing is self-criticism. Now, we talked about that as far as your inner critic, but that also can go much further. You can be very self-criticizing in terms out here, not inside your writing, but out here. You can look at yourself as inferior to others. You don't have the same opportunities that others. You don't have the same skill set. You don't have... maybe you don't have the financial means to just run out and publish right now, or get whatever it is that you're, we can come up with all kinds of things that will justify us not doing what we need to be doing in our writing projects. And so you have to stop that. You have to recognize what your self-perception is. How do you look at yourself? And where you see places, you have to be honest. You really have to be honest. Promise me. But where you see places that you know in your heart, I shouldn't feel that way about myself. That's wrong. Well, that costs me. Make the effort to change those. Find your way of changing those and come out of that. Don't stay in that, because it's robbing you of what you're trying to create. And it's just sad. You just don't need to be there. Don't stay there. This is all about finishing your rough draft. It elevates you to a new place in your writing. It elevates your writing project to a new place, so much closer to completion, because now other people can see what you have. You can go to an editor. I love it when someone comes to me as an editor and they go, here's my rough draft. It's so bad, but here, see what you can do with it. And when I look at it, it's not that bad at all. First drafts, rough drafts, they always have something they all need work. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. But 99.9% of the time, I catch their heart, and I'm just able to help refine a little bit, and we make adjustments, and we do some rewriting and revision here and there, and boom, they have a book that's now ready to go, and they like it, and it does well. It goes out and fulfills its purpose, and that's exciting at so many levels. But I'm telling you, that all starts with your first draft. That rough draft is it's such a milestone for you. I just encourage you to push in your own writing project. We're closing out a year before you know it. I mean, we're almost at Thanksgiving, and it's like Christmas is the next day. So we're almost in a brand new year. So I really encourage you, take a look at your writing, take a look at your project, and see if you can identify What's standing between you and that rough draft? And I'm pretty sure that you'll find something that's standing there that we've just talked about. I hope this has been helpful to you. I love sharing with you. Thank you so much for staying with me. We'll see you next time. God bless.